Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's our first meeting in a little while now, and so I really appreciate everyone for being here and continuing to follow the efforts at the Superfund site and both our involvement at the Superfund site. My name is Jackie Metcalf, and I'm the founder and executive director of Texas Health and Environment Alliance, or THEA. All right, hopefully upon your entrance to the cafeteria, you got a agenda. You will also, you might also want the note card and the letter, but if not, we can always bring one around if you didn't get one. I'll go over those later in the presentation. So I wanted to talk about our organization and a little bit about who we are. We were founded out of necessity. I was studying environmental science and geology at the University of Houston-Clear Lake and realized my family lived in between 4 Superfund sites. We had a groundwater well that we thought was pristine and that it had no relation to our health symptoms that we were struggling with. And after watching my community basically get bamboozled by these large, unproductive, hostile government meetings, I knew something had to be done, and so my mother and I began volunteering with the local community group, and we found an effective way to push the Superfund site towards cleanup. And so we set out to do more of this type of work. So because of that, I founded THEA. We currently work in 3 parts of Harris County. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We use the basic principles of environmental health literacy, which is backed by strategic science and grassroots organizing. We work to help communities impacted by historical waste understand the relationship between their environment and their health. We're not a law firm and we're not a water filtration company, though we are going to be talking tonight over water sampling that we have done in the surrounding area. All right, so now that's a little bit about us. I would like to go ahead and get to know our audience a little bit though, so I can tailor what I have to say depending on kind of the overall knowledge and participants here. How many of you are here tonight for the first time at a THEA meeting? Okay, all right, great. And how many of you here have a groundwater well?
When I lived there, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, so how many of you here are licensed attorneys? Okay, a few hands that I suspected would go up. All right, how many of you here tonight are local business owners? No local business owners? Okay. All right, now for our special guests. Are there any representatives here or people from government agencies or representing an elected office? All right, so we have, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay.
Hi, thank you for this meeting this evening. The state representative is on her way, Penny Morales Shaw, and she'll be here shortly, and appreciate y'all, everything you're doing here for this mission. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi y'all, I'm John Rosenthal. I'm the Texas State Representative for House District 135, which is no longer really reaching into this area, but I'm very concerned about this site. My district is all south of 290, and it runs mostly between Highway 6 and Highway 99, from 529 down to Clay Road.
All right, thank you both so much for being here. I also saw US EPA, we have Harris County Attorney's Office, and Harris County Pollution Control. Did I miss anybody? Harris County Precinct 3, Commissioner Ramsey's office.
Well, good evening, everyone. Kent Klingerman, Harris County Precinct 3, Commissioner Tom Ramsey's.
All right, love it. Yes.
I'm Melissa Rao, North Harris County Regional Water Authority, so I'm very interested in getting this cleaned up.
Lovely. Wonderful. All right, thank you to everyone who is here, because when we can all come together and have important conversations that are sometimes tough, sometimes not as tough, then we can get to a solution that's actually best for everybody. All right, so we are talking specifically, as most of you know, about the Jones Road Groundwater Plume Superfund site, which originated in this corner of the shopping unit at the corner of Jones Road and Bearley Lane. Over time, the groundwater plume was pulled to the west and wound up under this area of this neighborhood here. And my colleague Rachel will show you all some maps here in a moment that show where we're finding these contaminants today. All right, so the biggest thing that's happened with this site in recent years is that in the fall of last year, the EPA deemed this Superfund site in the current cleanup plan not protective of human health. There are over 1,000 Superfund sites in our country, and less than 10 a year are deemed by EPA headquarters as not protective of human health. It is a very big deal that this Superfund site was deemed not protective. And the big reason for that is because of the groundwater usage in the area. Where part of the plume is today is also the depth of the aquifer that most local groundwater wells that residents have are located. All right, so people can be exposed potentially to these contaminants via groundwater, but also through vapor intrusion. The contaminants in different forms do like to sink down, but then also they can vaporize and go into the air. They can go through the cracks in the cement slab and into a building, or simply in the front yard or out in an open air space. So the specific site updates that we're going to be discussing today is the in-situ bioremediation that is going to take place this September, which the EPA will talk about in just a moment. And what that really means basically is a type of remediation that's going to take place right there in the ground. In-situ, in place is basically the simple way of explaining that term. EPA is going to hook up the additional residents to the water line this fall. There are only a couple, and I'm going to show you the next slide to explain part of why it is so important for people to get off of private wells in order to control this plume, in order to protect public health, and in order for remediation to ultimately be effective. So why are we pushing for people within this area to go off of private wells? My family used to have a private well, and I tell you, when we go out and visit my in-laws, there's nothing like my son playing in that cold sprinkler water that you can only get from a well. You don't get that from a public source. And I understand that there's nothing like having your own water well, but I also understand how harming it can be when there are invisible contaminants coming through that line that you have no idea you're being exposed to. So, this map here, the pollutant here is a septic tank, which that's not particularly what we're talking about, but this is an example of what you could be dealing with. So if this home has a small well, and let's say here's the water table, the top of this blue line. The groundwater here is traditionally taking the septic, the plume here, we'll call this the plume, is taking it here to the left. However, this little small well is not impacting it. You can see here it's dipped the water table just slightly. It's not making a huge demand. It's not requesting a lot of water, a high volume to be pumped up. Well, then someone comes in and they put in this really big well. So this really big well is now having a large demand for water. Maybe usage from their home, they have more irrigation, or let's say maybe they're using it for a business or some sort of process that requires a much greater demand of water. What's happening is they're changing the elevation of the water table, and groundwater wants to flow down gradient. So this is how locally the groundwater flow, the direction of it can change. So prior to this big boy, the plume was going this way. Well, now the demand is going here, down gradient to this big well, reversed the direction of the plume, and now this homeowner is pulling it up into their well. They probably have a stomach ache at a minimum in this scenario. So I wanted to show you. This is an example to give you a visual and a better understanding of how this plume can change in a very localized area. And until there are not these different little demanding sources, the plume can't be stable. And that's why we are pushing in the areas of remediation that we are. Because the plume needs to be cleaned up once and for all. It's been there for decades, and it's time that it gets cleaned up. So now, I would like to invite Raji up from the EPA to talk about the map that you see here, basically the in situ bioremediation that I mentioned is going to be starting this September. And Raji, as well as the site's community coordinators, contact details are on the screen.
Thank you, Jackie. So, good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. And Jackie invited me to talk about this. So I just wanted to give you just a quick review of what we are planning to do in September. As you all know, we have been doing the, I don't know if you all know, but we have been doing a soil vapor extraction system going on there right now. So that's pulling in all the vapors from under the shopping complex. No, I just want to point. Sorry. Okay, I'll just talk. You need practice, right? So, okay, I'll just talk. So the L shape is what you see is the shopping complex. So that's where we have been doing the soil vapor extraction system. And also in 2016 and 2018, we did do in situ bioremediation in the wells that you see there, or some of the wells that you see there. And what has happened over time is as we're pulling the vapors out of the ground, and also as we did this in situ bioremediation, that is in the ground and remediating the contaminants, what has happened over time is you can start seeing a rebound, and the reason you see rebound is all the contamination that's still left in the soil, that starts coming into areas where there's less contamination, so it comes to that area. And so we're seeing we saw a little bit of rebound in those 3 wells that you see there. And so we are going to be injecting we are going to enhance and inject some compounds to enhance the bioremediation that's going on in the source area. And we've seen significant reductions both underneath the shopping complex and also in all the wells there. However, since the rebound is occurring, we want to go ahead and do one more round of in situ bioremediation in the shopping complex.
Thank you, Raji. Don't run off just yet. I got a question. Will you, okay, so you're doing it in these 3 wells, at, I believe from 20?
Points,
Uh-huh.
those points, right? So we
Yes.
get to around those wells. Yeah, those points, you see those red dots.
Okay, and then from like 20 to 35 feet below ground surface. So will that have any implication on the stuff that's at like 220, 240 feet? No? Okay. Okay.
There shouldn't be a problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Raji, and I really appreciate y'all coming down for Dallas to be here tonight. So community, please, feel free to talk with them or ask them questions as we get to the Q&A. Okay, so before I hand it over to Thea's Assistant Director, Rachel Jordan, I wanted to give you guys some context because, this is a lot of technical jargon, and I want to make sure it's not in one ear and out the other. So you're going to hear the term a lot, part per billion. What does that mean? Like, what does that even look like? And so a simple way to break it down is if there were 1 coffee bean and 12,500,000 cups of coffee. Very, very, very small stuff we're talking about. So that'll give you, hopefully, a little bit of context as we talk about these chemicals in parts per billion in the groundwater supply. Rachel.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the testing that THEA has done recently. This is actually independent from the UTMB water sampling study that was done, where we tested 55 properties from in and around the plume. For this independent study that we did, we sampled 13 properties from in and around the plume area, and totaled with 15 samples. We sent our samples to an independent entity, and we had them analyzed by ALS Environmental Laboratories. And unfortunately, we did find some of the dry cleaning contaminants in 2 of the wells out of the 13 properties that we tested. One of the, let me see. So up here we have one of the areas that tested positive for one of the dry cleaning contaminants, where we found TCE at 3.2, and then at this one right here, we found PERC at about 4 times the legal limit, or the MCL. So what is MCL? The MCL is the maximum contaminant level, and this is basically the highest concentration of a contaminant allowed in drinking water provided by a public water supply. It's not based on health, but it's based on large-scale feasibility. So their ability to reach this standard. There's also maximum contaminant level goals, or MCLGs, and these are non-enforceable, but they are based on public health goals, and they consider the health risks to the population, especially those that are most vulnerable, like the elderly and children. So for the contaminants of concern that we're looking at, the 2 most prevalent that you're going to see are PERC and TCE. The MCLs for those are both 5 parts per billion, or micrograms per liter. Those are equal to each other, so you might hear those terms interchangeably. But the MCLGs for both of those contaminants are 0, and MCLGs are set at 0 when there's evidence that the chemicals may cause cancer, and there's no dose below which the chemical is considered safe. So as we can tell, that both of these contaminants that we are finding are not safe for humans, and it is causing issues in people's groundwater wells. So here I just have a little snapshot of some data that was shared with us by a resident. These are numbers that were produced by the EPA during EPA's testing of groundwater wells within the community. This is one well in particular, and I wanted to show this to you guys mainly to look at the PCE concentrations over time. As you can see, back in 2015, the levels were 93.9, so they're pretty high. And as you can see, over time, they fluctuate quite a bit. And that is something that is concerning to us, that we're seeing these concentrations fluctuate within one single well. We are curious to see how they fluctuate throughout other wells and other people's properties who have open groundwater wells. So what exactly does this mean? What do these fluctuations really show? It shows that we need more data. It shows that even when we have a hit that is below MCL, like we do in this property right here, where the contaminant levels that we found were 3.2 and the MCL is 5, that's still too close for comfort for us. When we want our goals to be at 0, we want these levels to be at 0 in everybody's wells. Seeing a hit for TCE that was at 3.2 was concerning to us. It was definitely a lot further north, close to the edge of the boundary than we were expecting, and closer to the edge of the boundary than what we've seen reported by the EPA as well. So this map shows All of these little purple triangles are places where the EPA has reported contaminants of concern at levels at or above MCL at some point over time. And so we are pushing that finding a level of 3.2 just shows that we need to continue doing testing, even if we have a hit of a contaminant that's below the MCL one time. We've seen, like in here, these contaminants fluctuate quite a bit. So even if it's below once, it might not be below again. So we think that the EPA should continue testing all of the residential wells in this area to make sure that the community is adequately protected. I'm going to go ahead and pass my mic over to Lance Hallberg from UTMB, and he's going to give you guys an overview of the results from the sampling that we did together.
Well, thank you very much for everybody coming out. So I want to give you a short overview of what we came to do and what we've done so far. The original idea that for our project that we came out with was to try to identify the perchloroethylene that was the original contaminant in the area, and with the thought that over the years that it's been in the ground, it may break down. So we were also looking for trichloroethylene as well as the dyed and the vinyl chloride that it breaks down into over time. So these are representation of those particular chemicals. Okay, so, and I'll stand here and apologize to those of you that gave me samples that I promised results right away. On there that it has taken me as long as it has. It was a much longer learning curve than I had thought it was going to be when I was working with a new piece of equipment that we just got. Okay, this is the Torion T9. This is what is known as a gas chromatograph mass spectrophotometer. The idea of this piece of equipment is that it allows me to put in a mixture of chemicals in it. It separates out that mixture, and then it gives me back a fingerprint so that we can try to identify the components that are in that mixture. This is another piece of that equipment. It's known as the solid phase micro extraction unit. It's got a little piece at the end of the needle there that absorbs chemicals, and then that's what I use to transfer the chemicals from your water sample to the machine so that the machine can analyze it. Okay? So a fairly simple little thing. All right. This is just a quick snapshot of what we end up seeing when we shoot a sample into the machine. It comes back and it shows me the separations of the mixture, and then it gives me a list of the chemicals that it has identified after it's gone through. So this is kind of what we're looking at as far as what is shown to me. The other part of this, and the reason I'm giving this to you, and please, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask, okay? I'm trying to bring this down so that I can make everybody understand what I have to look for, all right? What you're seeing here is one of the standards that we put into the machine so that we can positively identify at what time point it comes out and the size of the peak that it gives to me, because that's what we use to determine how much of the concentration of what we're looking for is. Okay? Whoops. Big fingers. Okay, so this is a sample of the tetrachloroethylene, or PERC, okay, the original contaminant. This is actually a mixture of two components, that is the tetrachloro as well as the trichloro, okay? And what I really want to show you is that there are particular peaks that we can identify that we use as fingerprint in order to identify the chemical that we're talking about. All right, so this is, as I say, this is the picture of the tetrachloro, and then this is the picture of the trichloro. And as you can see, the weights, okay, let me try that. There we go. The weights have changed compared to the tetrachloro, or the, tetrachloro. Okay, so just a little picture, little show and tell. Any questions? Okay. All right, so this is basically the distribution map of samples that we took. So everything in yellow is within 0 to half a mile, all right, from the original plume. The green units are half a mile to 1 mile. The light blue is 1 to 1.5, and then the purples are 1.5 miles out. All right. So what did we find? I've got this separated out into two different columns, because what comes out from my reading, okay, are chemicals that the program positively identifies. They call them the known chemicals, all right? Then there are all the other chemicals that the fingerprint for those chemicals is not quite complete, all right? So they call them unknown. And so part of the reason why it's taken me so long to get these results to you is I have to go back through the entire list and try to determine is if the machine has made a mistake, if it has estimated the wrong things, and so part of my job then is to try to interpret all those unknowns. Now, having said that, what we have found in some of the samples that we have gathered, okay, is bromoforms, the chlorodibromomethane, and we have found tetrachloroethylene, all right, in part of the samples. As far as the unknowns are concerned, these are a list of the unknowns, okay? And once again, I caution you, I know that some of these look kind of scary, okay? But number one, they appear as very low levels, and that they are not positively identified, okay? They're things for us to look at and to resample possibly, and to make sure that everything is properly identified. All right? So, the bromoform and the dichloromethane that we see are known as disinfection byproducts, okay? It turns out, you'll see in the next slide here, that those two components, which are located here and here, all right, are chemical compounds that are formed from the chlorination of water, okay? It turns out that the only samples that contain those two chemicals in there came from tap water from homes that were on some kind of city water, okay? These two particular chemicals are found in almost everybody's water, okay? They're, again, very low levels. There are studies that are going on to determine if there's any kind of health effects from their presence, but to date, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that there is, all right? And this is kind of what we are talking about. This is an example of the tap water at one of the houses that we took samples from. Okay, and as I say, you can see here that it has positively identified both of those compounds. And as I say, this is the tap water sample. Okay. All right, so what are the distributions between what was known and what was unknown? This is kind of the distribution the question that I asked when I made this thing was, okay, are any of these chemicals coming strictly from well water, or do I find them in both well water and tap water? Okay? So again, I'm showing these two, which are the tap water samples, as you can see, are both coming from seawater as well as tap water that is coming from some other source than well water. All right. The perchloroethylene, on the other hand, was always found in well water. Okay. It turns out that the two samples that I located that had perchloroethylene were within that first yellow section of the study. Okay, so closest to the original contamination.